So this is going to be an unusual talk, I think, in that this is an experiment I ran over 10 years ago, and inspired by the Science of Philanthropy initiative, I finally dusted it off and started doing analysis on this data that was generated a very long time ago. The reason that it's been on the shelf for a while is that I left my job as a professor at the University of Arizona in order to become a research scientist at Yahoo Labs. And then when Yahoo Labs had its unfortunate demise at the hands of a CEO, Scott Thompson, who was CEO for 4 months, I ended up moving to Google. So I have been occupying myself mainly with the question of measuring the causal effects of advertising, which is also relevant to this crowd, and I'll be happy to tell you about that at some point if you like. But I've always been passionate about this charitable fundraising topic since before John and I did our first experiment, and so I'm delighted to give you something on charitable fundraising. I'm actually co-authoring this with Anya, our conference organizer, and she's been very helpful in getting me to think about things carefully again. And I think we still have a bunch of work to do on it, so we'll be grateful for your suggestions about how to proceed. So the topic is, how do suggested donations affect charitable gifts? And it's a direct mail experiment. So John's already given you a pretty good introduction, and you've seen some charity fundraising experiments already. This activity of fundraising, we spend a lot of money on, right? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% of the $300 billion being raised in the US is being spent on this, so we really care about doing it right. As John mentioned, there was one example, just to give you some other examples you might not have seen. One example was this paper that we did on seed money and refunds back when my name was hyphenated. And there we just found these amazing treatment effects. They were the most amazing things I think I'd ever seen until I saw Uri's paper. That we managed to raise 6 times as much money when we already had. So we took the dean's seed money and we allocated it in a clever way. So for each computer that we were raising money for at the University of Central Florida's new research center, one of those computers, we already had 10% seed money for that computer, and another computer we already had 33% of the seed money for that computer, and so on. So we had these little 6 different $3,000 fundraisers, and in that experiment we saw that when we moved from 10 to 33 to 67% seed money, we managed to multiply the number of dollars raised by 6. So that was a really impressive treatment effect to me at the time. And now, of course, Uri has shown that he can more than double that by framing things correctly about overhead. There are also some stuff about public recognition, so I really like to mention Adrian Sertivant's paper, where in Dutch churches, he varied whether the collection plate was an open plate or a closed bag, so that you could see how much each other person was giving. And got really interesting results. And then there's a really cool study on matching by Dean Carlin and John List, talking about varying the match rate on gifts given by individuals. Okay, so let's get to the topic of this one, just suggested donations. If you look at your mail, you'll probably notice that almost every solicitation you receive provides suggestions for what you might want to give. And usually there are multiple checkboxes with different amounts and usually including a write-in. And so we're interested in the science of how do you determine these amounts and what do they do to people's behavior. In particular, suppose we take this ask string and raise it slightly. So the experimental manipulation here is we're going to nudge all of the amounts left or right. So the baseline case is the ask string is, would you like to give $30, $50, $75, $100, $200, or other? And the manipulation is going to be, instead of 30, 50, 75, we're going to basically raise each one of them by 20%. and we're going to go with 35, 60, and so on. So what's that going to do to total gift behavior, and to the probability of giving, and what's it going to do to the distribution of gift amounts? Some other related work. Social information makes a difference. So Jen Shang and Rachel Croson found that giving potential donors information about past high donations increases their donation amount. This was actually call-ins during the pledge drive at a public radio station, and folks got a treatment that said, another donor like you recently gave us $200. How much would you like to give us? And varied that amount, and found that they were able to get positive effects until the amount got ridiculous. And then they got negative effects. As John alluded earlier, Bill Harbaugh has a really neat paper where a charity announced prestige categories. So the donors were going to be named, and the angels were this category from $100 to $1,000, and the benefactors were this category from $1,000 to $2,000, and so on. And you see that when they've announced that this is what they're going to do, the gift amounts change so that they all bunch up at the minimum required to achieve whatever category it is. So it's pretty similar to this suggested donation amount thing. Suggested donation amounts, there is some other work that I didn't know about at the time that I did this. I didn't know about John's work with Mr. Edwards because it hadn't been done yet 10 years ago. But in a university alumni phone campaign, the suggested donation amount of $20 increases the likelihood of alumni giving, but it lowers the average amount received, mainly because there were some guys who were giving 50 or $100, and then you suggest 20 to them, and they say, oh, okay, I'll give 20. So you can see that in the data, how that distribution is changing. And then there's an experiment that I had no idea about until I started working with Anya. So I had always claimed that John and I had done the first field experiment on charitable giving back in the one we published in 2002. But that's clearly wrong, because in the Journal of Applied Social Psychology, I think I've got the journal name right, Wyant and Smith were looking with both a door-to-door campaign and a mailing campaign. They changed their ask string and found that larger amounts decreased the likelihood of giving. Okay, so the opposite of what John found, but it depends on where you pick the amount, right? If you're picking kind of a large amount, it seems like that is going to reduce the probability of giving. At least this is my current working hypothesis. But if you pick a small amount, it's not necessarily going to, it could increase the probability of giving, because you are indicating to them that essentially another treatment that's been tried is even a penny donated helps, right? If you emphasize to people that the importance is participation and you can give any small amount you want, then you may be able to get higher donation amounts. So that's what this is pretty small literature so far, so it's not like we've solved everything, but this is the beginning of our understanding of how suggested donations work. So this particular field experiment, we worked with public broadcasting stations in Tucson, KUAT and KUAZ. And so it's a classical radio station, an NPR and jazz radio station, and NPR talk and jazz, and a PBS television station. And they were doing a year-end mailing to both current members and had given before but not this year, previous members, soliciting a year-end gift. Now, I only knew about the current members. So when we did this experimental design, I was thinking about amounts to ask to the current members. We'll see that the current and the lapsed members behave very differently from each other. This is a total of 36,000 mailings, and they're raising about $100,000 with this year-end fundraising campaign. So the experimental design looks like this. I basically showed you two of the treatments before. So we did basically what I usually do when I do research like this with a partner is I want to figure out, well, what does the partner really need to know about? And in this case, they really wanted to know, can we do better by personalizing the amounts that we suggest to people? And I said, well, that sounds like a really good idea, except we don't know which amounts to suggest to them. So to keep things simple, let's first understand how your normal fixed amounts that you've been using work, and then let's try to figure out, how do they look relative to personalized amounts, and let's take our first stab at how we should personalize them based on their past giving behavior is basically what we're looking at. So the first two treatments are called Fixed 1 and Fixed 2, and they vary. They're a fixed string that gets asked to each of the 6,000 people or 9,000 people who get that treatment. and one of them has amounts 20% higher than the other. Then we do these variable treatments where we're trying to match your suggested amount to information we have about your past gift. And so this is, the ones we picked in this case were designed to be kind of for the median giver about the same as the fixed treatment, right? This was our first benchmark. So we're sort of taking the median gift amount and saying, okay, well, suppose let's take that amount and look where it is on the fixed scale, and let's try to make the variable scale similar to it and see how that goes. Except it's going to be smaller amounts for people who gave small amounts previously, and larger amounts for people who gave large amounts previously. So the variable is, half what you gave last time, 75% of what you gave last time, all of what you gave last time, 1.5 or 2. Now, why are we letting people give less than what they gave last time? Because my understanding of the experiment was we are experimenting with current members and asking them to make an additional year-end gift, right? So we weren't asking them to renew their membership at this time. We were asking them, can you please dig deep and help us out at the end of the year, and take whatever additional deduction you'd like to take on your taxes this year. So that's why we're offering them amounts less than what they'd given before. One detail is we round these amounts to the nearest $5 amount, and so suppose you gave $10 before, that would give us the string 5, 5, 10, 20, 20, and we didn't want to make something look that weird, so in that case we boosted suggested amounts if necessary to make sure all the amounts differed by at least by $5. So that's what we'd get. All right. So the randomization involves a total of 36,000 people, and you can see this sort of 4x4 table giving you how many were there in each of the groups. We tried to get equal numbers of people. They actually got exactly equal numbers of people for the lapsed amounts, and then they differed somewhat in the current members, but not by much. And we ended up with 9,000 people total in each of the 4 treatments. And you can see that the TV lists are much bigger than the radio lists, and the lapsed lists are a bit bigger than the current lists, because these are people who have ever given before. So in TV, we're talking about one station. In radio, there's 2 different stations. And as I said before, the current members are being asked for an additional year-end gift, and the lapsed members are being asked to rejoin for this year, even though they haven't so far. So results. 5% of those that we mailed overall gave us a gift. That was 10% for those who were current members. 10% of current members were giving us an additional gift, and 1% of the lapsed members were deciding to rejoin us. So total of 1,800 gifts. The average gift size was $51. And you can see how that varies. The radio givers are giving bigger amounts than the TV givers are by some margin, more than 10% more. And the lapsed folks are giving more than the current, but that makes sense because the lapsed folks are being asked to become a member again as opposed to give us an additional year-end gift. So this was, our sample size was big enough to let us detect a 20% of a standard deviation in effect size between the treatments on the, what we'll call the intensive margin. That is, what's the size of the gift conditional on having given a gift. And then folks in economics like to use extensive margin for the, did you give a gift or not? So if I lapse into that jargon, that's what that's for. Okay, so the probability of getting a gift, asking for more money leads to fewer gifts, at least in one set of data. Among current members, this is where this is true, the contributions decrease by 15 or 16% as we raise all of the amounts by 20%. And you can see that in the bar graph. Here's the probability of getting a gift. It's almost 12% in the fixed 1 case, and it's closer to 9% in the fixed 2 case. And similarly, we get a fall in the variable 1 to variable 2. And sorry, you can't see my radio currents, but they're very similar. There should be a bigger bar here that is also showing the same pattern. Now for lapsed members, we don't see this. But remember, we didn't design the gift amounts very well for the lapsed members. We designed them for the current members, and then I found out, oh, they're going to do the same thing with the lapsed members that I hadn't been told about when we were doing the design originally. So we get the opposite pattern here, but none of the differences are actually statistically significant for these guys. It's hard to say that you have a statistically significant difference in any of these cases because the lapsed members are only giving at a 1% level, and so it's really hard to detect small differences when you have so few people giving in the first place. Right? The current members are giving at a 10% baseline rate, and these guys are only giving at a 1% baseline rate. But you can see, if anything, the point estimates are showing that people are more likely to give when you ask them for more, but we shouldn't pay too much attention to that. That could easily have happened by chance. Okay, mean gift amounts. We have not been able to discern a pattern when only looking at the means. We really need to look at the whole distribution of gift amounts in order to see anything. You can look at these numbers. Well, I'm not going to give you enough time to look at them very well, but we've taken a look at means, and we're not seeing anything terribly interesting or anything that we can make a systematic conclusion about that's true across all cases. So what can we do instead? Well, one thing that we're very interested in is who is actually using the suggested amount. How many people are using suggested amounts and in what circumstances? How many people are writing in? How many people are deciding not to give at all? So here's an interesting piece of data that on average about 60% of people are using the suggested amount, and the utilization of these suggested amounts decreases as the suggested amounts increases. So what I'm saying here is, and again, it would be a lot nicer if you could see my blue bars as well as my red bars, but sorry about that. Go to the next one here. No, I must have damaged the chart you created, Anya. Sorry about that. So so I'll ask you to trust me on that for the blue bars since they've become invisible, but you can see it in the red, particularly there on that variable treatment. So what we're asking about is, if you're giving, are you using one of the suggested amounts or are you writing in? And so 60% of people are writing in general, but a lot more of them are writing in when the suggested amounts are, wait, did I get this right? A lot more of them are writing in whenever the suggested amounts are smaller. So some of these folks are deciding to write in because the amounts don't appear to be what they're interested in. Here's a more interesting graph. The most common gift amounts are the lowest or the second lowest suggestion. So if you look at these graphs, what I'm giving you on the left-hand side is fixed 1, and on the right-hand side is fixed 2. So each of these had like 9,000 people being mailed, and this shows you all of the gift amounts given, and we have them on a fixed scale, so you can see how many people are giving at each amount. So in blue you'll see write-in amounts, and in red you see the suggested amounts. So the suggested amounts here on the left were 35, 50, 75, 100, 200. And then on the right, they were, it was 30, 50. Here they're 35, 60, 95, 120, and 240. So first thing is that the bottom two red bars are the ones that get used the most. And many donors' gifts are falling below the lowest suggested amount. So most of the write-ins are coming for people who are wanting to give something less than the lowest suggested amount, which probably accords with your intuition. Now, what's the effect on? Oh, sorry. One interesting exception where folks are really wanting to write in. Actually, two interesting exceptions where people are really wanting to write in an amount that's different from the suggested amount. So you see one mass here below the lowest suggested amount. Then you see another mass here at 50. We didn't give the option to give this round amount of 50. They had to give check either 35 or 60, or they could write in 50, so they did. And it's really bad up here at 100. We asked them to give 95, and a lot of people would rather give 100 than 95. And so make note of this for later, because we ran a second treatment designed to investigate this phenomenon. So what was the effect on revenues? Well, it's not entirely clear. It depends on whether we're looking at the current or the lapsed members. So for the current members, we see that a set of higher ask amounts gives us lower revenue. And I can tell you the total revenue on variable one. Now these are the same sample size for each group. Variable one, we got $40,000. Fixed one and variable one together gave us $40,000. Fixed two and variable two together gave us $35,000. So we're getting less revenue when we ask for higher amounts on the current members, right? So this is the extra year-end gift where we're getting lower revenue by doing a higher ask. The lapsed members, which I didn't know about, this actually represents a larger amount of the sample, but a much smaller amount of the revenue because the response rate is so low on these guys. We see there that actually a higher ask gives us higher revenue for them. So this, this is only really 2 data points on this topic, two observations on this topic, but it lends credence to my belief that the dollar amounts that we ask for have got to depend a lot on the context, right? The right amount to ask is different for different sets of people. In this case, the lapsed versus current members. So clearly, this result has to depend on baseline desired gifts. What would people normally want to give if we made it easier for them, and what are the askable asks amounts? So to give you a sketch of what I think a theory ought to look like here, or what we think a theory ought to look like here. In the variable treatments, I hope it's okay to speak for Anya, we see higher probability of gifts at round suggested amounts, $60, relative to odd amounts like $55. And we see this in a bunch of different situations, 60 versus 55, 100 versus 95, and so on. So we hypothesize here a cognitive cost of deciding on an amount. That's what the whole point of these suggested donations is, we think, that if you suggest an amount to somebody, that makes it easy for them to say, yes, I want that amount. And if you don't suggest something and you force them to write something in, they may decide, oh, this whole task is too hard, I'm not going to bother, right? So if that's the case, and if people also sort of have a latent desired gift amount, where if you somehow made it infinitely easy for them to give you a gift and not have to do any thinking about it, if you could somehow help them retrieve whatever their preferred amount is without requiring any effort, there would be this latent amount that would be their preference to give. And if that suggested amount doesn't equal that latent desired amount, then the cognitive cost is higher and can result in no giving at all. So that's the theory we're interested in. Some additional evidence on this is in the following year, we got a smaller set of people to experiment on, just the current members for the year-end gift. And we gave them either the 100 treatment or the 95 treatment. That is, we took the string that the radio station was usually going to ask for, but we modified that fourth amount to be 95 instead of 100, and asked, what do people do? So overall number of responses, whether they gave a gift or not, at all levels of gifts, we got a 6.8% response rate on treatment 100 and a 5.9% response rate on treatment 95. So it's not just that people are giving more hundreds than 95s, they're giving more gifts overall. The probability of a gift at all is noticeably higher whenever we do the 100 treatment versus the 95. So in this case, we're seeing that people are sort of averse to these round amounts, perhaps because, as in our theory on the previous slide, people are coming up with their latent amount as a round number for some reason, or I don't know. We don't know what the right theory is exactly, but this is the direction that we're going. Notice also that in the treatment 100, we have larger average gift amounts because a lot more people are actually giving those hundreds and drawing up the average gift. So let's see. When I said that this was a noticeable difference, how noticeable is it? Well, we only have 7,000 individuals. The p-value is only 0.13, so it's not statistically significant at conventional levels, but I think it's a very interesting point estimate. It's very suggestive. So what we're concluding here is that nudges on the suggested amounts can clearly impact gift rates. The smaller suggested amounts can generate higher probability of a gift. We definitely see one context in which that's true. We think that the best suggested amount clearly depends on the context. Is it current members versus lapsed members? What's an appropriate amount to be asking for? The donors here are showing a clear preference for round dollar amounts, 100 versus 95. And this experiment that John did that I mentioned earlier has kind of an opposite result. They're asking recent alumni from the class of 2003 to give $20.03. And that kind of gets them more excited than the $20 round amount does. Here we're getting the opposite. But of course, there's no particular reason to like a 95 in this case. But the main point that I want to leave you with is that these suggested donation amount experiments are a really rich area for collaboration between scholars and fundraisers. And if you're interested in learning, what are the right amounts for me to be using in my context, please get in touch with Anya or me, and we'll be happy to talk to you about it.
Super. Thanks, David.
Mm-hmm.
So I will take the first question. It's actually from the web. This is a person writing in from the Netherlands.
Awesome.
You might be able to guess who it is. I am curious about David's thoughts on what might drive the lower amounts in variable 2 compared to variable 1, since in both cases, the lowest suggested amount is lower than the previous amount X.
Right. So
And this is from Adrian Sudavant.
Who I cited earlier in the talk.
So he got excited and sent in a question, which is
good
great.
to hear from you,
Adrian.
I think the key here is that most of the action is in the current members who have already given us an amount X this year, and we're asking them to do an additional gift for this year, right? So it's the different purpose than usual. And so it seems, so I can't be sure of why, but I know that it has to do with that. Because again, we're not just ratcheting people up and trying to get them to give more than they gave before. We're saying, can you give us a little extra? And when they've already, if they've already given us $100 as their membership gift, and then we ask them to give another 50 versus we ask them to give another 60, they seem much more willing to go along with it in the $50 case. That's what we're seeing.
Right. And then the next suggestion was the additional evidence does suggest a direction. It also shows how little we know about how people deal with these types of decision problems, which is exactly what you went on to say. So we can, Richard, go ahead.
I'll wait for the microphone.
Wait for the microphone. And anyone else who has a question, please raise your hand and I can direct the microphone there.
Thank you. So I like this paper, and what we know from experiments on price is a lot of violations of independence of irrelevant alternatives. And I'm wondering if that can be applied here. With price, if you have two options, one cheap and lower quality, one more expensive and higher quality, you get a certain percentage buying each. If you then add a ridiculously high-priced item that nobody chooses, the probability that they'll choose the more expensive of the first two items goes up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering about keeping everything the same but adding a ridiculous category on the right.
Yeah,
And
that is.
what effect that would have on the probability of switching to the fourth category. And the other comment related is in your second experiment, take a look at analyzing the effect on the percentages choosing each of the ones that you didn't alter between the treatments as
Right.
well.
Are they substituting to category 3 from category 4, for example?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. The first idea is also very interesting. And of course, as an experimentalist, my answer is I have no idea. It'd be great to run that experiment.
Yeah, well, I raise it in case people want to do it.
Yeah, that's a terrific suggestion.
Sure, go ahead, right back here.
This is a practitioner question. I'm curious, with the lapsed donors that came back, was there did you follow them the second year for retention?
I did not manage to obtain that data. We've realized that there's some data that we're missing that we would really like to have. Unfortunately, my contacts at the radio station have all moved on since I was there, but I suspect they may still have everything in the database, so we may try to get it if we can get cooperation.
Okay, super. David, thank you very much.